Welcome to our panel discussion, which is called Can Schools Fix Broken Britain? My name is Toby Marshall. I'm an A-level film teacher and a member of the Academy of Ideas Education Forum, which is sponsoring this session. This session follows the riots of this summer, which were related to immigration, race, and religion, at least as I see it. And there was, of course, some very alarming and depressing scenes that we witnessed. And I guess understandably, because schools deal with young people and they're a point of contact, people have considered what it is that teachers can do in response to these awful riots over the summer, because obviously we as citizens don't want to see that again. And that's what this session is going to explore. So we have four excellent speakers to help us think through what I think is a very important, but also a very difficult issue. Some fine judgments here need to be made. And they're going to speak for 7 minutes in the order in which I'm going to introduce them. So speaking first is Ian Mitchell. He's an A-level teacher of English literature and psychology, and he's a fellow member of the IO Education Forum, which you can join if you're a teacher and find out about things we've been doing. Following Ian, we'll have Pamela Dow, who's Chief Operating Officer of Civic Futures and has many interesting things to say on this particular issue. Then we'll have Rakib Ehsan to my left. And he writes for Spike to many other publications. He's not produced just one report this week, he's produced 2. So he's very busy. And he's got an excellent book called Beyond Grievance, which I'm sure is in the bookstall. And then finally, to my far right, geographically, not politically, Michael Merrick, who's the Director of Schools at the Diocese of Lancaster, and I know also has some very interesting reflections on this important topic. So, Ian, could you kick us off?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak. My answer to this question is yes, as long as the government stay out of it. I'm irritated enough when the government signals a curriculum review, and that's for the sake of the curriculum. But when they have one for the sake of society, I get a bit suspicious. Bridget Phillipson's curriculum review intends to consider embedding critical thinking into the curriculum to arm children against online disinformation. Critical thinking is too complex to properly define now, but I understand it to mean at least partly having a sense of perspective and accuracy about a topic or thing. It's a very high-order skill. But remember that critical thinking, evaluation, analytical skills have been part of GCSE and A-level for years. Now, maybe we haven't been doing it very well, but it is already embedded. There were over 50 under 18-year-olds charged with disorder following the unrest last summer. I think that's rising. But they are not the only young people to antagonise the authorities of late. There's a Just Stop Oil protester now in prison for her role in conspiracy to cause a public nuisance. There have been people arrested for their involvement in Middle East protests as well. And I see why many think that the manipulation of truth is part of the reason that young people get led astray. Many of these young people are or were academic success stories. The jailed 22-year-old Just Stop Oil protester is a Cambridge graduate. And the 3 girls who joined ISIS from East London back in 2015 were described as straight-A students. Curriculum success clearly does not guarantee that youngsters will be effective critical thinkers who always make wise decisions. So when the Education Secretary says, let's review the curriculum so that we can arm young people against dangerous ideas, I worry that politicians don't understand the limits of the curriculum and that teachers can only control so much. I am also not sure that you can directly teach critical thinking. Does the Education Secretary realise this? I think you can teach it indirectly. I think you can model it. You can teach concepts well, and that sort of skill can emerge from the knowledge, but I think it's caught more than it's taught. I'd hope that my students might think twice before they chant something that they don't understand at a protest, or before they block a motorway in the name of saving the planet. But my teaching won't manage that decision-making for them in a given situation. There are also many young people who I think are incredibly resistant to social influence. And I've met many adults who aren't, and that includes teachers. I also think it's much easier to get a sense of perspective on material that's in the past, which is why acquiring critical thinking is best left to history lessons. That's just to name one subject. Even for adults, understanding what extremist content looks like on social media in 2024 is not easy. You need temporal distance to really have perspective on something. Is the government concerned that children do not know what critical thinking is, or is it concerned that too many young people have unpalatable opinions? I suspect it's the latter. Politicians have to be very careful before instructing teachers to essentially shape values and beliefs. Many young people, anyway, would not conform to an opinion just because their teachers say it. When did you last vote in an election based on something that your geography or chemistry teacher said to you when you were 14? If teachers are going to instill beliefs and values, they have to be very robust beliefs. Teachers can't just be a mouthpiece for the state, but they can be advocates for commonly shared values. The problem is, at the moment, I don't think anyone really knows what those shared values are. Now, despite my caveats and concerns, I still argue that schools can help to reduce, if not fix, the chances of young people being led astray by misinformation. So what can they do? Well, teachers can teach concepts well. What words mean, what they don't mean, including words like bigotry, racism, genocide, fascist. We can teach what these things mean and make it clear that they're not just a toy that you can use whenever you feel like it. Also, schools can model a bottom-up, evidence-based approach to forming an opinion. In English literature, for instance, you train the individual to gather evidence first from a thorough reading of the text, then construct and refine a thesis. Get the text into perspective. Consider all the relevant evidence. Don't just cherry-pick the bits you like. It's less likely that you will become wedded to ideological beliefs if you've been trained to consider evidence objectively. And finally, plan and teach the curriculum well. Do what you're good at. Curriculum content is there for a reason, so believe in it. All society's current problems have happened before. For example, picture, if you will, a European city with a thriving economy. A haven, in fact, for commerce and trade. It has a cosmopolitan population. It's multi-ethnic, multi-religious. Yet, beneath the surface of this modern success story, there's seething prejudice, bigotry, resentment, and that's exacerbated by lies and misinformation. That's the setting for Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. What the school curriculum has done up to now and what it can do going forward is to introduce children to the past so that they can better understand their futures. It's not the main reason why we should teach curriculum content like The Merchant of Venice, but it is a useful byproduct, and I hope the Education Secretary is mindful of its value during her review. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. Perfectly on time. Much appreciated. Pamela.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Ian. Sir Humphrey Appleby had a line in an episode of the old sitcom Yes, Prime Minister. We must do something. This is something. Therefore, we must do this. And this is known, of course, as a politician's fallacy. But I think there's an education system version of this, which is kids are lacking X, schools teach kids, therefore schools should teach X. And we saw this a lot at the Department for Education. Famously, the special advisors used to keep a list on the wall of things that campaigning groups had demanded were on the curriculum: gardening, Japanese, mindfulness, British values. And the school's fallacy isn't a fallacy because any of these subjects are bad. Obviously, just to be clear, I'm very pro-gardening, I'm very pro-Japanese. And mindfulness technically is on the curriculum, of course, if we do it properly and call it by its proper name of prayer. No, the schools fallacy is a fallacy for two very compelling reasons. Firstly, there just isn't enough time in the school week to do everything. So if something goes on, another thing goes off, and you have to decide what that thing is. But secondly, and as Ian said, much more importantly, we mostly have absolutely no idea how to teach many of these desirable abstract nouns that people think children should learn at school: respect, anti-extremism, Britishness. Let me try to explain more with a metaphor and an example. So my metaphor, I found out quite recently the precise meaning of the phrase point blank with reference to weaponry or ballistics. So it doesn't just mean close, which is how we use it in language. It means the range between the weapon and the target where you don't have to adjust for trajectory. So it's gun dependent, of course. Yes, with a small firearm, you have to be pretty close, but with a tank or a rifle, you can be quite far away. And as soon as I found this out, I realised what a perfect, helpful metaphor this is for public policy. Because the most effective levers a politician has, of course, are the point blank ones, where you can make a decision in Whitehall and have a direct, immediate, predictable effect. So changing the EBAC accountability measure was a point-blank policy by including specific core subjects, English, math, science, a language, geography or history, in the A to C GCSE performance tables a school has to publish, rather than just any 5 A to C subjects. There was an immediate and unambiguous incentive for schools to focus on making sure pupils were literate and numerate. But most policy goals aren't point blank. And the art of successful politics, policy making, government is how well you understand and manage the adjustment for trajectory. Forgive me, I like this metaphor, but it's a bit contrived. The least point blank policies, of course, are those relating to fixing society. Because as soon as you, as Ian brilliantly said, as soon as you start using curriculum time for social cohesion or other contemporary issues of concern, perverse incentives and unintended consequences creep in. You can't adjust for trajectory because there's so many unknown unknowns. And so an example, and not a very nice one, forgive me again, female genital mutilation, FGM. The Guardian had a campaign against it in 2014. And to be clear, I've never actually met anyone who's for it. Those who are for it belong in jail. We have laws about the mutilation of children. But one of the Guardian's requests was that the Department for Education write to all schools to raise awareness of FGM. Now, we probably knew exactly which parts of the country, which micro-communities had a potential problem with FGM. And with a bit of local joined-up enforcement, we could probably have found the handful of doctors or teachers who maybe knew what was happening and were turning a blind eye. But the Guardian was persistent, the campaign was very high profile, and the department did end up writing to 27,000 schools. It did absolutely nothing to address those places where FGM was a problem, of course. And my strong hunch is that it probably undermined tolerance and understanding. So imagine the teacher in the small rural primary school, 99% white, culturally Christian primary school I went to in East Riding. The teacher gets a letter from the department, diligently prints off the Wikipedia page on FGM and tries to have a conversation about it with a group of 9 to 11-year-olds. Do you think that he or she is successfully doing so without demonising or stereotyping other races or religions? So about the only thing we do know, and we know it for sure, is that the best possible way for a young person to become the author of their life story, to overcome any constraints of their background, is to be able to read and write and have aspirations for their future. It's about the only thing we know for sure. It's a point-blank policy. Andreas Schleicher, the OECD education advisor, once noted that internationally comparatively, the UK has the broadest but also the shallowest curriculum, because we've put a lot of things into the curriculum that we expect teachers to teach and schools to signal and Ofsted to inspect, partly as a result of very successful lobbying campaigns by single interest groups. Kids are lacking X, schools teach kids, therefore schools should teach X. So if we conclude that schools should can fix society, we are in danger of pretending that we know the exact things that teachers can effectively do to reduce knife crime or tackle extremism. And in doing so, in concentrating our efforts on that, we're in danger of forgetting what we know actually does work: learning to read, reading to learn. So schools can't explicitly fix broken Britain, if we're accepting the premise that Britain's broken. And nor should they. But To finish on a more positive note, the great thing about a good school or a good further education college is that they're a microcosm of society, and the rules that they set, the standards they expect, the daily rhythms and character built through tenacity in study, fair play at sports, deferred gratification encouraged in learning languages or music, the manners they insist on, the examples of virtue they give, those have a good chance of staying with those people through to adulthood, and they do influence rounded human beings and happy families. And in that way, indirectly, as Ian said, not directly, schools have always fixed society, and they always will.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Rakib.
Well, first, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session. Now, looking at the title of the session, Can Schools Fix Broken Britain? I look here a little bit differently. I think that many of our schools are themselves broken. So the idea that these institutions would fix broken Britain is somewhat suspect to me. So, and also looking at the current Labour government, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson talked about launching a review of the curriculum in primary and secondary schools, talking about embedding critical skills which will equip students to tackle fake news, disinformation and putrid conspiracy theories. But I would argue that many members of the Labour government need exactly that kind of course. So I think that one of the main issues for me, and this is probably one of the main topics of the session, is what are schools there for? What are their responsibilities? What are their duties? And I think that there are far too many people in the educational profession, in the education system, who have forgotten about their bread and butter responsibilities and duties. I think that there is far too much political activism in our school system. Now, of course, schools can play a role in addressing community cohesion issues, encouraging intercultural knowledge exchange. But I think that all too often that has moved into various forms of tribal political instruction. And that can be deeply confusing and has actually created a more fragmented school system, especially in terms of the messaging that is provided on matters of cohesion and solidarity. The Chartered College of Teaching has pointed out that schools shouldn't be expected to solve all the problems in society. I'm not sure anyone's ever really asked schools to do that, but they would also expect that schools don't add to existing problems in society. That is also very important. And I think that what we've seen in recent times is schools just coming across as quite confused in terms of handling various political and social issues. I'll give you one example. There's been a great deal of fundraising activities in the school system associated with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, fundraising for Ukrainian causes. But there's been a certain hostility and skepticism when those very same activities have been carried out in line with the Palestinian cause. And that is the issue, really, that there is increasingly confused dynamics in terms of how schools approach, in my view, quite complex geopolitical issues. Now, of course, schools should provide a forum in terms of exchanging cultural ideas and also facilitating various forms of mutual understanding. But there is also the risk that it could create more tensions by doing that. So in my view, schools, in terms of what they should be promoting, is what are the rights that people have, their opportunities, their freedoms, what protections exist in modern Britain. I certainly think in terms of politics, there's absolutely no harm in terms of talking about people's potential for civic engagement, how they can participate in democracy. But I think that if you start moving into what I'd consider to be quite contentious issues, I think you could create a great deal of problems in the school system. Now, just to make this point on British values, I grew up hearing that phrase so many times. People who don't know that I've lived my entire life in my hometown of Luton, which is incredibly diverse in ethnically, racially, and religiously. And I think that if you were to ask 5 people, what do British values mean to you, you might get 5 very different answers. Now, I think schools have a role to play in saying, this is what the UK government has stated are British values. Those terms such as respect for the rule of law, mutual tolerance. But I think also the issue is that many people will have different definitions of even what tolerance constitutes. I think that there's definitely a message to be promoted in terms of treating people with dignity, with a basic level of respect. But I think that ultimately the bread and butter of schools is preparing pupils and equipping them with the skills to cope in a very competitive market environment. I think that is the key. I think that if you look at international league tables, I think the UK overall could be doing a lot better, especially in terms of numeracy skills and mathematical capabilities. And I think that there's been far too much emphasis in terms of talking about anti-racism training, being a fine example. How do you bolster social cohesion? When I think that first and foremost, we need to get many of our schools in order in terms of equipping young people with the skills they need, not just to compete in the domestic market environment, but increasingly globalized world economy. So I think in this, it's something that Toby talked about ahead of this event and also here at the beginning of it. People have very different perceptions on matters of immigration. Some people think that two-tier policing is a reality. Other people consider it to be a far-right conspiracy theory. And I think that trying to manage these dynamics in schools can be hugely problematic. So I think that the new government needs to very much stick with the bread and butter of what schools should be, what they should encourage. And I think that there's something to be said about schools encouraging people to participate in democratic processes, what their rights are, what the protections they have, and ultimately the kind of freedoms and opportunities which are offered in modern Britain. But I think that if it starts moving towards various forms of tribal political instruction, then schools could actually lead to the fostering of an environment which could be even more divisive. And I don't think that's anything that anyone truly wants. And I'll just leave that there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rakib. Okay, Michael.
Thank you. I enjoyed all three of them. Thank you, everyone. So, yeah, as a Northern Catholic, working class, once upon a time ginger young man, it's generally my lot in life to be the grit in the oyster. So that's what I will try to do for you today. And I'm going to come at things a little bit differently. I will state my case plainly that no, schools can't fix broken Britain. And it is unrealistic to ask them to do so. I thought the programme notes were excellent in identifying the problems. Broadly speaking, we might say that they are propping up a creaking social welfare state in the midst of huge demographic change. They include having to kind of instigate some sort of moral renewal and fix all the behavioural and attitude problems of all those who attend their schools and their parents too. And finally, provide therapeutic intervention for all of those when it goes wrong as well. It seems unfair, it seems unreasonable, and I don't think schools have the tools to do it, for three main reasons. Firstly, I think it's a liberal fantasy, if I'm honest with you, that the education is this kind of Odyssean journey where we all come to some sort of enlightenment, where we are freed from the chains of ignorance, and when we do reach a certain level of intellectual aptitude, we will become these nice, pleasant citizens, and of course agree with those in charge, because what else could an educated mind think? Wrong. Next, schools are downstream of culture, they're not upstream. Schools broadly reflect the prestige faith, the prestige views and opinions of those who are in the political and cultural elite of our society. They don't generate culture. And unless you think the answer is more of those prestige views of the political and cultural elites of society, then I would say schools don't have it within them on their own to fix society. And finally, there's already a culture clash in our schools, broadly, between those who work in them and those who attend them, between an educated grad class who, generally speaking, we speak with a broad brush here, but hold a certain set of prestige views, and quite often a load of people who attend the school who don't. And this came out really clearly following Brexit. I remember there were some head teachers really getting upset about the Brexit vote and making all sorts of terrible claims about the intellectual and moral rectitude of those voters. And I was thinking, maybe 70% of your parents in this school voted that way. Is that the road you want to go down? So no, I don't think schools can do it, and I don't think they've got the tools to do it, and I think it's unfair to ask. Now, why is this? That's the question. To use Chesterton's aphorism, it's a living thing that stands against the tide, and a dead thing merely floats with it. If I'm going to put things very, very bluntly, I don't think the secular liberal state has been able to create a firm ground of values or vision for schools to be able to do this work. Ultimately, it has tried, certainly, British values, citizenship, civics, PSHE, all of it, the endless assemblies I've sat through and delivered, hasn't worked. And so I would argue that, therefore, something else is needed. Something else is needed that gives us a way of centering the discussion on what is shared, not what makes us different. Now, if that was the grit, hopefully here's the pearl. I think, and I would say this, it's my job, and this is being recorded, so I better say it, that our Catholic schools give this a good go. Oh, thank you. I would argue that for all that gloom, that there is gloom about these prospects, that there is potentially a way of addressing each of these issues, and it comes with looking at things a little bit differently. If your analysis of the problem is solely material, your answer will always think we need more provision, we need more resources, we need more staff, we need more facilities, and it will never end. I promise you it will never end. Secondly, if you think the answer is completely functional, it will be we need better curriculum. We just need to, you'll go around in that same circle of citizenship and civics and all of the rest of it that's happened before, and we won't get anywhere. I would argue that the reset that's required is away from the material and the functional, and to address the core issue, which in my opinion is a sense of alienation and disenchantment of a wide swath of society, and especially our young. They feel disenchanted with the world around them. They feel alienated from its expression. Now, if we bring this new lens in, I would argue our schools offer a way, possibly a way, of getting back toward that sense of something shared. Even just culturally, I would wager that if you have had an education in a faith school and you have had effective RE and scripture and theology, then your visit to the National Museum will prove more fruitful than another child who has not been given that privilege. It is a way to speak to the inheritance we have received, to the people who came before us, and hopefully to the kind of society we want to make in future. But it's not just that, because if you just leave it there, there's a danger that you just recreate that functionalism, but in a different way. Because what I would also say is, whereas that might be the horizontal movement of what we want to do, there is a vertical too. And that idea, that notion of re-engagement, of re-enchanting, of taking away the alienation, also includes the theodrama of the thing. It points upwards too. It wraps it in a sense of the deeply symbolic, in a sense of ritual, of liturgy, of the mysterious, of sacrifice, and it binds us all one to another in a common project. Now, of course, not everybody might opt in, but it breaks my heart that not everybody's offered it, because it seems to me that that should be the absolute minimum that every child in this country is given, some sense of who we are and their part within it. Might call it induction. So, what does this mean? Well, in our sector, we've always seen this as a work of service. We use imagery about why we have schools, which very much leans on biblical ideas of things like the parable of the mustard seed, or the city on the hill, or the yeast and salt, or the streams of living water. In other words, this idea that by preserving something that can point both outwards and upwards, we give people a chance to be re-enchanted, to not feel too oppressed by that alienation. Might say that we reach parts of the imagination, maybe parts of the soul, that others would struggle to reach. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen many a fine wall display in a school with lots of different abstract nouns of respect and dignity and attitude and kindness. I don't know what they mean. So, can we fix it? That was the question, and I said no. But. I'm going to put out a little shout out for our little part of the garden, because I would say we are trying. We're giving it a go. We don't get much thanks for it, quite frankly, but we'll keep on doing it. And it might well be that we don't get the thanks or the recognition, although the welcome to you all would always be there. At least not now. And sometimes, at my darker moments, I do think that, are we really so different from maybe those monks in the scriptorium 1,000 years ago, who were also busily preserving the treasures of culture, the treasures of literature, of art, of law, in a world that had similarly forgotten its place, a cultural amnesia, a widespread iconoclasm. And they weren't thanked neither until very, very much later. Maybe we'll look back in future and people will recognise our own part in sowing the seeds of renewal. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd like to thank the panel there for some very thoughtful contributions, and I kind of thought I knew what I was myself think about this issue, but now I'm not so sure. It strikes me perhaps that there's kind of three questions that we might want to address, but obviously the audience will take it the way that they want to, and I'll go out for at least a couple of rounds and bring the speakers back in before they sum up in reverse order. So I think one question I'm trying to get my head around, and I don't consider myself an expert in this issue, but I think it's something we all need to think about, is was there anything new about this summer's riots? I mean, were they distinct? I mean, I immediately thought of the Gordon riots, the anti-Catholic riots in this country some time ago, but what was actually going on there, I think is a useful thing to consider, and I don't know the answer to that. I think we've had some ideas presented on what schools shouldn't do, so that's another thing that we might explore. Schools could certainly make this situation worse, for sure. But then I think the kind of interesting one, and I kind of take the panelist's point, kind of criticism of what Labour's kind of proposed, and I agree with them. But what should schools do in response to what happened this summer? I mean, not in this round of London riots, but in the previous round of London riots, one of my students was sort of bragging about being involved in some kind of capacity, and I said to him, I said, well, "What the hell were you doing? I mean, what did you think you were doing by kind of hanging out? And you could have got arrested, and you got a film studies exam coming up. That's much more important. And why are you doing this?" He said, "I was getting my taxes back." And I said, "But you've not paid any taxes. You've never had a job." So it is a practical reality, and I'm interested in the views of the audience, right? Because teachers operate under the license given to them by society to teach the next generation. It's a difficult job. We often get it wrong, but what does the audience think teachers should actually do in a practical sense? I think we're agreed that the whole curriculum shouldn't be rewritten on the basis of the riots. That's kind of a silly move. But this has happened, right? This event has happened, and it bleeds into what we do as teachers in the classroom. So over to you. Okay, who'd like to speak? I'll take a kind of batch on the right. So start with the gentleman at the front there.
I'm from Bradford. We had some riots in 2001, quite terrible, but in many ways far worse than the ones we saw recently. We had a load of people from the great and the good arrived in the city, given the task of reviewing what we were doing wrong. And they all told us what we were doing wrong, and we changed everything. And we haven't had any riots since, but we still have an enormously divided city. But the thing I just want to observe, the first thing is there are three or four absolutely magnificent schools in Bradford. One of them is Feversham College, which is a Muslim faith school. And it is one of the best girls' school. And it has fantastic results, sends a dozen kids every year to Oxford and Cambridge from poor families in Bradford. And yet every time it comes up, people turn around and say, "Oh, it should be closed down. We can't have faith schools, especially Muslim schools. Muslims are really bad people. We don't. What are they telling them?" And I've met the girls, and there's well been. I've spoken at the school, and they're just like all the other girls everywhere else, But and it seems to me that what these girls are being given by their education is a truth that is not always being given in secular state schools, and we need to find a way for those secular schools to give their students a sense of that truth, a sense of transcendence, if you like, because that's one of the reasons that allows people want to succeed, but also to understand that going and smashing up shoe shops, really, or whatever it is, or throwing bricks through the windows of places where asylum seekers are staying, isn't actually helping you at all. And I think that I shall stop now, but I think that's a really important thing for us to consider how it happens.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's the kind of narrative thing, isn't it? Bigger picture. Yeah, the gentleman there.
I'd like to strongly disagree with the first speaker in the spirit of Battle of Ideas is getting a bit of a cosy club, in my opinion, and we need some strong disagreement and debate. And I do disagree with speaker number 4. So why do I strongly agree? So much not taken into account. My union's position, the NEU, is call the people involved in the riots a bunch of racists and right-wing thugs. They emailed members to stand with an SWP front called Stand Up to Racism and organise a counter-demonstration against Toby Robinson on the 26th. He's nothing to do with it. These are alienated people, as someone said, who are incredibly discontent with their life. It didn't come out of thin air. The roots are in that alienation. So this crude blaming of a phantom right wing and wrong ideas, I think, gets us absolutely nowhere. And it also divides and fans the flames. So to come back to speaker number 1, teaching what words means and concepts, to me, is besides the point. People don't base their actions on ideas. They assess what kind of society they want to live in. Is that an authoritarian society? Would that serve them best? Or a more egalitarian society? Would that serve them best? Or what tribe they belong to? And then they indulge in post hoc reasoning. They can be as educated as you like, but that's what they're going to do. People are not really driven by ideas. So anyway, so that's why I strongly disagree. Can schools fix it? Absolutely not. Perhaps a more just society can, but this is a really big project. To think that schools can fix it, I think, is crazy.
Can I ask you what you think teachers should do?
They should tell the truth in a balanced way and give multiple kind of sides to it. There's no point in saying, here are a bunch of right-wing thugs, when these may be the parents of some of the children in the school who have just got terrible lives.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The lady there.
Hello. I'm a TA, well, former TA up until 2 weeks ago. I've got a 24-year-old, an 11-year-old who's got special needs, and a 9-year-old. And I think what this kind of sort of social engineering does is it breeds mistrust. So I deeply distrust both of my younger children's schools in a way that I didn't distrust my older sons. I never would have gone into school and asked about RSE or what they're teaching on race. And now I do. Anytime there's a new member of staff, I want to know what type of member of staff, what their ideas are, because I don't want them indoctrinating my child. And it's really, really sad that I feel like that I feel like I can't trust what they're teaching, that in RSE and PHSE, I now want to see the PDFs, I want to see the slides, I want to see what books they're using, in a way I just didn't do that with my 25-year-old son. And in this way of, can we fix, can schools fix society's ills? As a TA, I could gather around a particular child that was having certain difficulties, but you can't fix it. And you asked them, so what's your name again?
Toby.
Toby asked, what can we do? What we can do is be better adults, because children are watching us. They see how the Prime Minister, called out the former Prime Minister and you're disgusting and look how many kids you've got. And, we see how the Education Secretary is tweeting out crazy stuff about private school children. And, we see how they behave. We see how they see how our leaders behave, how teachers are calling other black and ethnic minority people coconuts on, and all this kind of weird stuff. They see that. So if we want young people to act better, then we need to act better. If you want civil discourse, for them to feel out their ideas, then we need to act better. Teachers need to be brave. If you want young people to be brave and argue in a coherent, coherent way, then teachers need to do that, model that in a way.
Thank
So,
you. Okay. We've had some great contributions from the floor there. Could I just ask if there's anybody who's got just a couple of very short points to make before I bring the panel back in? The gentleman there, if it's a short one, just because I want to bring the panel back in. Yeah.
I used to work over the road at the Department for Education, I think, as well as Pamela Dow.
Yeah.
And I've also been, while I was there, I worked on the introduction of phonics for 4 to 5 year olds.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That has led to a significant increase in our 9-year-olds from 2017 and 2020 international studies, zooming right up the charts. My experience as an adult literacy teacher is there's often a gap very early on in a child's education. So if we can improve and continue to improve from 4 to 5 and onwards, the literacy of our children, they're better placed to get a job, they're less likely to go to prison, etc., etc. So I just wanted to introduce a positive note about some of the things that are happening out there.
Lovely. Thank you. And one more very short point. The gentleman there with in front. Yeah. Thank you.
If we want children to navigate misinformation a bit more, I think they need to know more about how algorithms work. I'm a computer science teacher. I'm in a minority of 1 in my school, about 1,500 students, and the Labour government has no idea how we're going to get more teachers into STEM subjects.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So could I bring the panelists back in? There's lots on the table, but just don't feel that you've got to address everything. Just anything you think is interesting. Pamela, did you want to?
Thank you for putting me on the spot there. First of all, to the gentleman who's just spoken, thank you for your service on phonics, and completely agree. One of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is the politicians will always say, oh, what works? We need to know what works. Well, arguably for the last decade, we've had a randomised control trial of different models of school. The free schools around the country show what sort of, how do you get the sort of ethos that Michael and the gentleman here were talking about. Well, let's look at the ones that are doing really well. Let's look at Michaela. Mason is sitting there. You can speak to him afterwards about that. We do see some really excellent schools, and you can and outcomes, and you can copy what they're doing. But the thing that was been going through my head actually since the first speaker and the gentleman here from the talked about the NEU, and I'm not going to claim this as my own point. It's a point that Jonathan Rutherford made, who some of you might know, an excellent thinker and writer. After the Brixton riots in the 80s, there was a huge public policy response. Margaret Thatcher's government commissioned Scarman to write a report. There was a really big public debate about what were the actual deeper causes of this. After the Toxteth riots, same again. Many of us will remember 2011, the riots triggered in Tottenham. There wasn't a Scarman report equivalent, but there was a really big attempt to try and understand what were the underlying causes. And with the excellent battle of ideas as the exception, I don't really see that after this summer. We've just, as you said, sort of said, they're just racist thuggery, and we all move on. And I just think that's interesting that there hasn't been the same sort of tolerance and compassion to sort of understand. I don't think it's a coincidence that there was without condoning anything that happened, that something happened in Rochdale, where people are still really angry about a lack of institutional accountability for 1,500 abused young girls. I'm going to pass over to other people, and I don't have any other.
No, thank you. That's very interesting. In, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Thank you. What's interesting about the way these arguments go is that, and it happened to me when I was doing this, that you start with a no. Your instinct is to say no, schools can't do anything, but that's a very negative position. You end up thinking, no, hang on a minute, I've got to have some optimism, some hope. So you push back the other way, which is where I found myself. There is a danger of us thinking that schools don't and can't do any good. I'm not saying that we should, via the Labour government, we should all set about trying to fix these problems directly. But my point was indirectly, by just doing your job well, there's a lot of good you can do. And we have to bear in mind, most young people don't get involved in these things. And it's interesting what Michael was saying about the assemblies, and you don't know how much good they've done. You only know that it hasn't stopped one or two straying, but you never know what effect these things have had on young people. You know, months, years after they've heard these things. And I want to obviously pick up on the point that was made directly to me. I think words and their meanings matter, and I think the meaning of the word racist matters. And I think teaching that's a definition in a dictionary that's not what I want or think. It's there. And I think it matters to make sure young people know that. I've met a lot of young people who think that racism is everywhere. They seem to think it's rife. They seem to think most people are racists. And the trouble is with that, if you use a teacher's logic, if your playground's full of litter, everyone else will chuck litter on it. If everybody thinks there's more and more racism, that opens the door for them to be racist without feeling bad about it, which is why I think it's important to make sure the definition is known. And we heard the word coconut used in that context. I'm pretty confident I could explain to a young person why that's racist. That is a racist word in that context. You know, the labeling of a person based on their skin color, negative label based on their skin color. That's what I mean. If you have a definition and you have a clarity about that, there's a lot of good you can do. You can challenge them. There's one or two other panelists have said about the need to confront and challenge, like your film studies student. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rakib.
Yeah, I just want to pull up on this gentleman's point, is that those disturbances in Bradford, that very much played a part in the 2001 Cantor report on social cohesion as well. Yeah. And I think that what's really interesting is that I do think there has been a vilification of faith schools, especially Muslim faith schools, in recent times. And I think that's also because many of the values and principles those kind of institutions promote, order, discipline, and that sense of really, really knuckling down and being tenacious, being determined. Those values are increasingly going out of fashion in Britain at large. I think that is also that is a serious problem. And I think that more generally, and I will say to Michael as well, Catholic schools are also very good at promoting these kind of values as well, so you don't feel left out and accuse me of Islamic favoritism here. But I think that, I think that absolutely, I think that actually there's many secular mainstream schools can actually learn from how those kind of faith schools, how they function and how they govern themselves essentially, and the kind of values and principles that they promote and cultivate within their own institutions. To the lady's point about being concerned about the substance of PHSE lessons in her children's schools, I think that the real problem is that in far too many mainstream schools, the relationship between parent and child is being deliberately undermined by teachers. I think that's a very serious and very poisonous form of state overreach. In my view. Now, and this is why I was making the point in my initial statements. I think that it's very good for British children of all backgrounds to understand the kind of freedoms they have in the UK, their rights, their protections, the opportunities they have in terms of building their skills, culturally enriching opportunities. But I would really say I don't think it should go much more beyond that, if I'm being absolutely honest. I think that in terms of what schools are able to do and what they should do, I think they should be very careful, and they shouldn't have an overestimation of what they're capable of and what they should do. And I think that ultimately, when it comes to various forms of moral responsibility, that ultimately rests with families, parents, and grandparents as well, by the way, who often get overlooked completely nowadays in terms of the socialization and upbringing of children. So I think that just in short, I think that this is why I have reservations as well about Labour government saying that we need to embed critical skills in terms of equipping people with the skills and resources to cope with fake news, disinformation and putrid conspiracy theories. This is a government that includes members of cabinet who have struggled in recent times to define what a woman is. We don't need to be lectured on matters of conspiratorialism from these kind of politicians. And to the gentleman's point, you weren't very happy about your union and its messaging. I think the country needs to have a national conversation about those riots. But I think the issue is when you have a trade union stepping into that conversation in such a way, I think that it is potentially quite provocative. And I think it's actually letting down a number of trade union members who have probably done far more for the anti-racism cause than many of the people who are now running some of those unions, who have very influential positions within the trade union movement. One of the first things I did when I entered the world of work was join a trade union. But I've been dismayed, to be honest, by the direction that some trade unions have taken, especially when it comes to matters of social cohesion, community solidarity, all the rest of it. And I'll leave that there, Toby.
Excellent, thank you. Michael, did you?
Yes, but sorry, Mario, I didn't catch your name. It was wonderful. I hope next year you're this side of the table, because I'd love to say, I think you've got the key thing. I was speaking to a lady at the back of the room before this debate started, Mabel, I think she's still here. Hello. About there just seems to have been a complete switch up on the relationship between parents and schools. And I think that word distrust that you use is absolutely right. There was possibly a time where there were just kind of shared understandings and expectations and assumptions which just don't quite feel as firm as they once did. Apologies. Don't feel as firm as they once did. And this is leading to like an anxiety, a fear, and like you say, a distrust. Now, some of these things are very explosive, things that we see in the press all the time, certainly around HRSE and things. But I think you could probably say it's more widely. And this speaks to that culture clash that I was referring to, this distinction between a kind of a prestige set of values and ethics and those which possibly the wider community share. And how do we kind of navigate that tension? Now, what I would say that sometimes, like one of the most effective things you can do when you're trying to kind of get through these kind of clashes is just be really clear about your terms. I think part of the difficulty is that if a parent chooses an Islamic school, to take your point, Simon, or if a parent chooses a Catholic school, there is a certain set of expectation and understands about what that means, like what your child will hear and what are the parameters through which it happens. Couldn't we say that with our community schools? I don't know if we can. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a community school? What can parents assume will be the norms and the standards by which their children will be educated? Now, the reason that's a problem is because in that clash, generally speaking, any clash, generally, the stronger wins out. And in this case, the strongest antagonist is the state. And there's a risk that the state starts thinking that their kind of mission, their almost savior complex, is to rescue the children from that ignorance, to bring them over to their way of thinking and abrogate the rights of the parents in the process. Now, in our faith, we're very, very clear that parents are the principal and primary educators of their child and schools exist to support them. I don't know if that always follows through in government policy. I mean, just lately, last 6 months, massive increase of fines if you don't attend, punishment taxes if you try something different, and home inspections if you give it a go yourself. This is a state that is wanting more control, feels a little bit worried about what children might be being brought up with and wanting to integrate children into their own way of seeing the world. I think it's a danger. My last little point, I do think this points to the bigger picture. I think you're absolutely right when you say what we need is better adults. I think there's a danger that we always think, and this comes back to the horizontal versus the vertical, we always think the answer is politics. We always think that a better curriculum and a new system, a different charity will fix the issue. There's a French theologian called Henri de Lubac who once said, we always think we need a cure, but maybe we need conversion. And by that, I don't mean that you all need to be at Mass with me tomorrow at 8 a.m. if anybody fancies it. What I mean is that possibly the problem is cultural and in that sense spiritual, not just pragmatic.
Okay, excellent. So I'll go out for another round and I'll kind of go to the back. And if I could ask people so that we can get as many people in now on the discussion, if people could keep their observations and questions just short so we can get as many people in as possible. One of the things that I'm interested in, I think we're doing a good job of identifying many of the problems that we confront. But I ask that we take responsibility for those problems as well and consider how we actually move forward from where we are right now to, a kind of better situation. I'm very interested in this issue of kind of teacher authority and teachers undermining their authority by being too partisan in the representation of politics. I'm also interested in this idea of belief and the kind of devoid and a kind of crisis of belief in non-faith schools. I don't think we need faith to have belief and wider narrative. I'm a big advocate of, of a kind of what Durkheim described as a secular sacred. Schools could have a different, wider story, world civilization and culture, learning as a narrative. But anyway, over to you. So I'll start at the back and kind of move around there and then kind of bring the panel back in. Okay, so there's a lady with a grey top there next to the person with the microphone.
Thank you. It's really interesting contributions from all the panelists. Yeah, I thought it was sad but very unsurprising that the talk about the riots in the summer immediately turned to what can we do in schools and can we have more critical thinking to counteract fake news. I mean, critical thinking is something over the years which I've obviously argued very strongly for, and it's a kind of motherhood and apple pie thing. It's very hard to be against critical thinking, and I've even heard myself kind of coming out with the platitude that we need to teach children how to think, not what to think. But I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic about this as a project. You know, I think the problem is not just that you can't have critical thinking in the abstract, that children need to think about something first before they can think critically about it, but more to the point and in line with what Michael was saying, children need to believe in something. First of all, they need to have something that they actually think positively about before they start being encouraged to think critically about it. And I think the real danger in our schools right now is that what children are getting under the guise of critical thinking is two separate things. One is very thinly veiled political contempt for the legacies of Western civilization, to put it quite grandly. It's a finger pointing and it's a very cheap political point scoring of white man, white man bad. And that's kind of critical thinking. And I think what this engenders is a real cynicism and a sense of cynicism with British society, a cynicism with the past. And I think that deep-rooted cynicism and breeds a sense of alienation. And I think that is one thing that really contributes to the kind of incoherence and the kind of riot. It obviously doesn't cause the riots, but that sense of not having a feeling of belonging to British society. Toby, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think this has to be linked to faith, whether that's Catholicism or Islam faith. There's no need for it to be linked to faith. There's plenty in the world that we can inspire and fill children with a love of the kind of products of our civilization, that, to quote Matthew Arnold, the best that's been thought and said. And I think the teacher's job today is really to become standard bearers for Western civilization.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a young man in the back with the Battle of Ideas t-shirt.
Thanks, Toby. In the wake of the Middle Eastern conflict, at my school at least, I'm not sure if it's a countrywide thing, but there are a number of wholly student-organised protests going on outside of the school gates during school hours. I'd just like the panel's opinion on whether that sort of thing should be allowed and whether that kind of thing, that student body acting on their own interests, on their own back, whether that sort of thing contributes to schools fixing broken Britain.
Thank you. I'm going to take a few more at the back, but people at the front, I will come back down here as well. Okay, the gentleman standing up with the glasses.
I just wanted to pick up on the excellent point made about critical thinking, if you like, almost needs a substrate in order to work on it. And never has this been clearer than the misappropriation of the word critical in critical theory, which is anything but an objective basis for reflection. And the question then is around, in terms of citizenship classes. I have a friend who has taken their secondary school, child out of citizenship classes because they simply cannot trust what they're going to be conditioned to believe. How do we overcome that?
Okay, thank you. Any more at the back before lady?
Yeah, so my question is actually, is it time for schools to have a return to knowledge-based subjects and actually scrap PHSE? Because the introduction of mandatory relationship and sex education with parents not being able to withdraw their children from PHSE or the relationships aspect of RSE has actually allowed third-party organisations to use this introduction into schools as a vehicle for political indoctrination. And is it time that we got rid of this? Because actually these classes are actually causing more of a divide than they are doing any benefit to children.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring the panel back in. I mean, I think that's it's a very interesting irony that it was a Conservative government that introduced a national moral curriculum for the first time, which, given that they spent so much time arguing against it, but that's like the national curriculum all over again. So, just one little to abuse my position slightly, but I think critical thinking can be taught. I mean, it's philosophy, isn't it? And the trivium and logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. I mean, these can be taught, right? That's not a dichotomy against knowledge. You teach that in a context where people know things, and then you make thought itself an object. I don't see why that can't be taught in schools and why that wouldn't be useful. It's a kind of major omission, I think, in our curriculum that there's so little. Well, there's none philosophy. Anyway, who'd like to come in? Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, lots to take on there, and various things would just be a one-word answer for me. Student body activism, no. PSHE scrapping, probably yes. But the one that really kind of I've been thinking about was the lady who was talking about. I think that the final phrase was the schools need to be standard bearers of Western civilization or for Western civilization. And I don't know, I hear this a lot, and it sounds wonderful, it sounds beautiful, it sounds like the kind of thing I should absolutely sign up for. But I also, in a way, kind of think it's a little bit 2024 cope, because what is Western civilization? Like, what is it rooted in? I go back to my point about the National Museum earlier. Can we even access that inheritance, that heritage? Do we have a way into it anymore? What are we being standard bearers for? When the cold winds blow, when we've forgotten all of all the different parts of our inheritance, what is it that we can say, yep, we have this thing that will make it make sense and we will give this to the children? Because quite often it just comes out a little bit like a glossy brochure and a curriculum. But I think it's more than that. So that would be where my head would be bouncing. How do we access that privileged role of standard bearer?
Okay, great. Pamela, did you want to?
Just really quickly, so to the gentleman at the back who talked about British outside schools, I hold both these things to be true. I am delighted that teenagers are caring and daring and organising enough to protest about an issue that's close to them. It genuinely means sort of self-led study, looking into what they believe. And as I say, those are the years when you feel like that about things. But I also think the school should put them into detention or expel them, because that's the rules of the school. If you're not in the classroom when you should be, then you are breaking a code that you've signed up to. So delighted that teenagers are protesting. That's what teenagers do. But also delighted that schools have rules that it shouldn't be happening during school time. And the second thing, I mean, again, so I cited Mason already, but Mason said a very good thing to me about PSHE curriculum. If it's not prescribed by something, and there isn't some sort of handrails put in around it, then any charlatan or chancer comes in. So it is a bit of a trade-off as a school of saying, well, I'm going to accept the premise that we kind of have to do something, because there are kids arriving who are just not getting anything from their parents or carers. But it pains me to say it, because I don't think that it is always done well. But I'd sort of rather it was done in some sort of formal, assured way than if the school just says, well, at lunchtimes, at breaks, after school, we're just going to let any group in to talk about these things, any theatre group to come in, and as the lady there said, you just don't know what some people are saying. I think.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Rakib.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd say is that in terms of what schools are able to achieve, I think there's a huge emphasis on shared values. But I actually think one of the most positive experiences I had from a social cohesion perspective was a cricket match I had at school. Now, I went to a state school in Luton. The cricket team was predominantly South Asian Muslim, including myself. And we had a cricket match against a private school, exclusively white British. And I remember on the way there thinking, what are these fellas going to be like? What are they going to make of us, really? It was one of the most fantastic experiences. Also because we won by 9 wickets as well, but we won't get into that too much. We won't get into that a bit too much. But it was so amazing that I had this unfair, and I'll admit this, unfair preconception of what these fellows would be like. And it was the most fantastic experience. And we had lovely sandwiches after the game, had a fantastic chat. Now, it's very clear that your average South Asian Muslim in Luton might have quite different values to a privately educated white bloke in Sandy, in Bedfordshire. Now, you want a degree of value convergence, but I think actually what also matters a lot is positive shared experiences. You don't have to sing from the same hymn sheet on every single social, political, and economic issue to get along. That would be my view. I think in terms of this discussion about should schools be the defenders of Western civilization, I would strip it all back and I'd bring it right down. I've always said that one of the things I'd love to see being taught in every single school in Luton is the spectacular story of Luton Town Football Club. I really would, and I'll explain why. Because this was a club, by the way, the oldest professional football club in southern England. I'll just make that point. It's very much on the brink of extinction, very much a local civic asset. And then to rise from the brink of extinction all the way to the Premier League, unfortunately got relegated back in the Championship. I think the big thing that we have is that there's many people in Luton who will spend the vast majority of their lives in that town. Now, they might go to the odd holiday here or there, but they will generally stay in Luton. Now, of course, I've been given the red card, but the point I'd make is this. I think that if you want to be serious about cultivating social solidarity and community cohesion through schools, I think you need to make it more local.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Did you want to come out?
Yeah, I forgot to mention the NEU comments, which were quoted, are a worry. And I'm paying their salaries, actually, so I know what you mean. The second thing about critical thinking, I don't think it's taught. It could be taught directly. I think it is taught, but it's not taught in the way other things are. So it's not the sort of thing that you can put in 1 or 2 lessons and it's done. It emerges and it develops and it crystallizes and so that's what I was saying about that. It's an acquired skill. This thing about shared values. So somebody said Western civilization, and then we say, yeah, but what does that mean? Well, one of the issues is that when somebody suggests something shared, the immediate thing is to knock it down anyway. I mean, the British values thing is fascinating because when it was a Conservative government who defined that, what are we about? Well, they had to call it something. They called it British values. Now, we had a debate here at this festival about the fact that the British values really are universal values in many senses, and it's a fair point. But it doesn't change the fact that they're still widely held in this country, and they're belief. And you've got to call it something. So we called it that. But I've hardly ever had any conversations with teachers who actually really, in any way, endorsed, pushed, or not even inspectors, actually. Very interesting. Whereas other things, you see, teachers pick and choose. The governments put these things in place and the teachers pick and choose which ones they fancy. PSHE is another one. I try and avoid it, but other people think it's brilliant, and it's a pick and choose thing. So I think if at some point, if you're not a faith school, you've got to decide what it is you stand for and mean, and stick with it. Somebody mentioned Michaela earlier. I remember when I visited there, I think I'm right in saying there was a Union Jack and a picture of the Queen, and there was this whole national identity thing that they were pushing. Well, maybe we've got to talk about that. Do children need a sense of feeling proud about their country? It's not something that's ever been that palatable to me, but maybe it's time to think about that.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we've got time for, I think, probably one more round of speaking floor contributions, and I'll try and take everybody who puts their hand up. But could I just ask that everybody who speaks just does so very briefly so that we can get as many people in. I have to say, I'm rather liking my new job title, Defender of Western Civilization. And I'm naturally thinking there must be a pay rise in this because that's quite a big job. And I'm also interested in if anyone wants to push back on really the topic of, is it really as bad as all that? I mean, in terms of education, I mean, I work as a teacher. Are things really as bad as we're describing them? I mean, it sounds awful, and that doesn't really correspond with my professional experience. That isn't what it's like, I don't think. It's not as simple as that anyway, should I say. So I'd just be interested if any teachers, people who are teachers, want to kind of push back on that idea that it's really, we've gone to a hell in a handcart, and nothing's happening in schools, and yeah, just on that. Okay, so I'll start at the back and kind of work forward. I'll try and get everybody in before I bring in the speakers in reverse order. So the gentleman there with his hands up, yeah.
So hello everybody, nice to see everyone here. I'm a teacher in Tottenham, northeast London, and I'm actually a trainee teacher. So I've been there for about a year now. I did a pre-qualified teacher placement there. And as I'm training, obviously within that, I've got a lot more reflections than I do assertions, to be honest, in my repertoire at this stage. But what's quite interesting, I feel like a lot of us hear a conversation about how can we get kids to be more critical in school, whereas the question I hear is actually how people are actually asking, how can we politicize our children more?
Okay, yeah.
And I think like the reason I think that is because there's a lot of these sort of assertions around what we should believe, what the kids should believe. A lot of it's kind of, we're sitting around trying to work out what are the values that we all sort of hold dear.
Yeah.
But we're not actually listening to our children. And when I say that, I don't mean that the children have some kind of knowledge that is ruined with society and culture we need to listen to. What I mean is that they have questions, and we need to listen to the questions that they have before we try and answer them.
Okay.
Because actually, as it Rakib? Yeah,
Yeah,
Rakib
yeah.
mentioned that we need to make it more local. And like when I'm in school, we might have these, assemblies and stuff about whatever it might be, Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, stuff like that. But I'm in Tottenham, like 95% of the kids there are black, and they're not stupid. They're not. I'm not saying that they'd be stupid to believe those things or to buy into those things. But what I'm trying to say is that they have questions, they have thoughts, and they're not just there to absorb all the ideas that we have. And it's up to us to develop those completely. Like they already have those thoughts.
Yes.
So I think we just need to ask them and have conversations. And sometimes I have conversations with the kids in the playground,
Yeah.
in the classroom, that kind of thing. And those are some of the best times actually to touch on local things that matter to those kids and actually have some kind of impact on who they are.
Thank you for that.
Hello, I'm also a teacher. Hi, Ian. We're talking about lots of opportunities to give our kids critical thinking, but actually I think a big problem as a teacher is we don't have many opportunities to demonstrate critical thinking in terms of like just even having diversity of opinions. As a teacher, it is quite terrifying sometimes to put your hand up and sort of go against the accepted narrative or what's okay to believe. A lot of the inset days are definitely coming from a certain political angle, and PSHEs. And there's not a huge amount of opportunity to even disagree. So I do worry about whether schools can fix broken Britain, but on the flip side of that, I do think teachers can help. So in terms of modeling in your classroom, I mean, I'm an art teacher, but kids talk about all kinds of stuff, but modeling just a tolerance to diverse opinions and letting kids talk about things and not condemning kids for certain beliefs or certain ideas they may have. Particularly, I work in a boys' school, so there's a lot of stuff about masculinity. So that's the point I just want to make.
Lovely, thank you.
I'm certainly an advocate of local history, but I'm also an advocate of schools actually looking far broader than that, not just kind of concentrating on the initial kind of stuff. One of the things I do want to say, so I live in Newcastle, and it's a year to the day that the school that my kids went to was closed down for 5.5 weeks because a metal fascia fell from the side. And one of the problems of that was that it was online learning for everyone, regardless of their ability to do so. But what that really did, that broke the kind of the bond of adults and the school, because basically, most of the time, if the school says something, we try and favour the school and talk to our kids and say, actually, school's important. But given that the school broke that kind of that relationship between us, it just really meant that we had a massively different attitude towards the school. And I think, when things like that happen, when you start to look at things like online learning, or you start to look at things like the content of PSHE,
that really does kind of start to break those bonds. And I think those are the sorts of things that we need to kind of start looking at.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. The question y'all ask is, can schools fix broken Britain? The question I would ask is, schools are breaking Britain. These schools in this country, in my opinion, what I've seen, you've got teachers that I would say 90% of have one political point of view, and they are indoctrinating these children into their beliefs. You see this all the time. When you were talking about giving your own opinion and stuff like that, these teachers are throwing out. We used to see Greta Thunberg in the classroom every day on BBC Bite Size. If you didn't buy into exactly what she was saying, there was no differences in opinions and stuff like that. I just feel like the schools are just
indoctrinated.
They're making things worse.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to bring it back to the spiritual, because I think there's an underestimation of how much that potentially could help us in society. I don't know the statistics or anything. So I'm wondering, in school, what you teach or schools that you've taught, how do you see a difference with in link with that and the critical thinking playing together? Is it a lot softer in terms of dealing, me and you having an argument and we're not falling apart? Is there a better dealing with life? Because we keep talking about the mind, critical theory. And I think to myself, hold on a minute, human beings, we're physical, we're spiritual, we're imaginary. You can take the spiritual out and you can say we're imaginary, but if we're all this in our head, there's something missing for me. And I think we're missing a trick, whether we believe in God or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, it strikes me the boundaries are important in this discussion. So particularly the boundary between schools and parents and their respective roles, but also between schools as sites for education versus politicization of the curriculum, which is coming up a lot. So my question is how should schools navigate these boundaries? How do you find the boundaries, particularly around the political? So we've said we want teachers to be model adults who demonstrate how to have these discussions. We should give children spaces for having these political discussions, but how do they do that without being overtly political?
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say that as a teacher for 23 years, having seen the changes that have taken place in recent time, one of the things that I think we've got to be very careful of is that changes to the curriculum cause the kids to rebel.
Okay.
And what you're actually seeing is, in some cases, the reason why you see kids going off to find their things on TikTok is because of what has already been said to them in the classroom. And unless we do something to actually encourage positive belief in themselves, then we're really going to struggle in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm just picking up at something the lady said way back there, about 5-10 minutes ago, about teaching children how to think rather than what to think. Like, I'm an author, I've just written biography of Edward de Bono, who invented the concept of lateral thinking, and he wanted to get thinking classes into schools. He managed to be incredibly successful in industry, in commerce, but he couldn't crack the education system. I think his books, Six Thinking Hats, Six Value Medals, and Six Action Shoes, they are in headmasters' bookcases and things like that. But thinking classes do work. Lateral thinking classes do work. They work in Singapore and in Iceland. So I just wanted to say that.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to push back on faith schools by saying, if there is no overarching sort of value system and we promote more and more faith schools, aren't we just, and assuming that we're not all sort of as reasonable as we all are here, are we just promoting more, this is not a word, but ghettoization in a way? That's kind of what I wanted to ask. Yeah.
Hello. So I wanted to talk about moral panics because I feel like some things are really accentuated by the media, and I actually think this causes a lot of people to go on things like TikTok, which is so easily accessible to the younger generation, and they often then are exposed to this fake news. And I actually think that in schools and education, that can then give them the context of these deep-rooted issues, and then you can have open discussions where you have alternative interpretations. And I think if you're educated on the context, you can actually start to challenge this and challenge the fake news, and then this could actually be a solution to that.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
I just want to pick up on the point that you made earlier, Michael, about alienation. And I think working class alienation in particular, which played a big role in this summer's rioting. White working class boys consistently underperform academically. I think the Sewell report, the one the left went mental over in 2021, had them at the bottom of pretty much every table. When they leave education, they're likely to be discriminated against by kind of companies, corporations, even the RAF, not wanting white males. They tend to hold low prestige opinions on things like immigration, multiculturalism, etc., which are helpfully identified in our prevent training as signs of extremism. And masculinity also kind of in PSHE lessons kind of identified as a sign of kind of extremism as well. Wrapping up, to what extent do we think government policy is failing white working class children and boys in particular? And to what extent is that fueling white working class resentment?
Just a personal comment, which is I think it. I just appeal to some degree of sympathy towards teachers in the sense that, because I am one, that you are combining multiple roles when you're a teacher, and it isn't as straightforward often that you can simply focus on your professional role, which is to engage young people in powerful symbolic forms through which they might understand the world, to better support them making intellectual decisions in their future. Sometimes, I mean, this is, my story with a chap who's kind of claiming to have had some involvement in the prior London riots. Sometimes you're just responding as an adult, right? You're just responding as an older male. You can get that you can get things wrong in that situation, but that was, I think my response in that situation, I was just responding as an older male saying, Christ, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? You weren't thinking, were you? It's not a game. This stuff is serious criminal offence. And have you any idea what it would be like to be in prison for something like that, and how limiting that would be? I mean, I think teachers probably should say that as well, but I wasn't really thinking in those terms. I was just thinking of, a young lad that I was teaching and what could have happened. I mean, he might not have even been there, of course. He might have just made the whole thing up to brag. But can I just say that I do think it's complicated. There's multiple things that you're trying to do as a teacher, and often you're just responding as a human being, right, towards another human being. Okay, so I bring my panel back in reverse order. Michael.
Yeah, lots of things to think about that. I mean, very forcefully, the point was made that schools are breaking Britain. I would just think that's a bit too pessimistic. I don't think they are. I mean, I think they're just stuffed full of people who are trying, who are not always given or don't always have the tools to do the kind of things that they're expected to do. And sometimes that leads to non-formal interactions or for kind of spontaneous reactions that might not be ideal when you think about them, but they're not premeditated. I think the issue is bigger than individuals in buildings. I really do. I mean, generally speaking, I know that there's been a certain tone in this meeting, but I would say, I still maintain there is reason for hope. That was the pearl. I mean, I think we can do something here. Like, I don't think we need to despair. What it depends on, for me anyway, is kind of, if you want to know if schools can fix Britain, it depends what you think the problem is. And for me, there is a certain set of problems that no, they can't fix, but there are other ones they can have a better go at. And ultimately, if we accept that analysis, are we also going to accept the medicine that comes with it? Would we be willing to embrace the changes, to accept the trade-offs that would be included in that? Clearly, there would be a very strong and no doubt vocal cohort who would say no, but there might be others who say yes. And it seems to me that ultimately, to finish with words that I used here last year, ultimately there is going to be a ruling ideology. There is going to be a way of seeing the world which determines how we order our relations and our engagement with one another. And basically, choose your fighter.
Lovely, thank you. Rakib.
I think firstly we just need to start from the point that the family unit is the greatest social safety net known to humankind, not schools. This is just be very clear about that. And then a final point: schools, there's definitely an opportunity for them to do cohesion building activity, but I think that needs to be more local. So surrounding local shared stories. And I think that would be a good way of going about it. If we're very serious about fixing broken Britain, I think we need to understand that. We need to understand specific local circumstances and how you can boost local cohesion through schools as potential forums of intercultural knowledge exchange.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you, Rakib. Pamela.
4 very quick points. I do think we need to think more about passing on the best that's been thought and said, just to illustrate how far out of whack we are from passing on the sort of canon of Western civilization. There was no backlash at all to writing a letter about FGM to 27,000 schools. But when I helped Michael Gove mark the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible in 2011, something that you can use to teach history, democracy, printing, religion, by sending a facsimile OUP copy of the King James Bible to all schools. There was a horrific backlash for months and months and months. I do urge everyone to the point about the Rakib's point about the football match. There is a section, a very small section in Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, where he talks about flipping the hive switch, and he's talking about the sort of when organisations become activist and identity led. The most important thing that an organisation can do for the sort of well-being of its employees is actually the sports team, the choir, the sense of shared endeavour, because we are 90%. Chimp, but 10% bee. Just a final point, sorry. I don't think Britain's broken. In 2022, when I left the Cabinet Office to set up Civic Future with Munira Rosa, I was in an existential state of dread about late-stage capitalism. But I spend quite a lot of time with early 20-somethings now, and they are, like the teacher from Tottenham said, clever, funny, on top of critical thinking, really committed to their country, building things, getting things done. So there is reasons to be cheerful.
Thank you. We must keep smiling.
Yeah, well, I argued yes. I just said, but keep the government out of the way. Yes, you can do a lot. That's the point, I think, about schools. They're not going to fix, I don't like that word, but there's a lot of good you can do. You have to believe that you're doing good. You have to get out of bed in the morning thinking you're making a positive difference. And it's likely you will. You can confront these colleagues face to face and just say, look, what's the issue, or if there's something you don't like about what they're saying, you can have a conversation with them. I'd like to finish actually with there's one of our friends on the Education Forum tells this lovely story about an A-level politics teacher who only ever really asked Socratic questions to the students. You never knew what he thought. He just asked these questions and challenged them on pretty much everything they said. He was particularly good at telling them what was coming up in the exam, actually, but he was very good at making them think. And I think there is again belief that you can be somebody in the classroom who can be a bit mysterious. They don't really know what you think, because they know whatever they say, you will come up with a critical point.
Okay, lovely. Can we thank our panel?